Hey everyone, welcome to the Question Everything podcast. Today's guest is Urmi Hossain. Urmi currently resides in Canada and is a professional in the financial services industry. Urmi has written Discovering Your Identity, a Rebirth from Interracial Struggle. In this interview, we'll discuss her unique story of growing up in Italy while being a child of Bangladesh immigrants. Urmi, thank you for joining us in the Question Everything podcast. How are you today?
I'm good, and you?
I'm doing great. I'm so glad to have you on. So Urmi, I just finished reading your book. This was a book that was very unlike any others that I've read before. You really went into depth on your childhood and how unique it was growing up in Italy and also England, but mostly Italy, being an immigrant with your Bangladesh or Bengali, parents. And it seemed as if there was so much friction, to say the least, between Italian culture and the Bengali culture that you grew up with. So I'm interviewing you now, and you are someone who's very successful in the financial services industry. What made you want to write a book and go in depth on the struggles you faced growing up as a quote unquote brown girl in a foreign country with strict immigrant parenting? What made you want to write a book about that?
So I always wanted to write a book, but I never knew when was the right time. And then in the recent years, I read another book of another brown girl, and her book was called The Confession of a Brown Girl. So after reading her book, I was like, she's able to be really raw honest about her thoughts, and she's talking about how it is to be a brown woman and she lives in Canada. And so I got really inspired by her book because I was like, I could resonate a lot with whatever she's writing. So then I approached her. I asked her a little bit about how she wrote her book, and she told me that she self-published it. And she told me that for her was a way to get all her thoughts out of her mind. And this is what gave me a little bit of an idea. I was like, you know what? I don't need to go through a publishing book. I can, a publishing company, I could just self-publish it. And that's when I was like, okay, I'm just going to go ahead and talk about these things that happened to me, these reflections when I was a child, because these are things that still carry on with me. And so I decided to write about those episodes, or how it felt like to be a brown girl living and growing up in Italy, knowing that I have a really strict parents, but at the same time I was living in a culture that was so open-minded. And I was thinking that I'm pretty sure my story can resonate with a lot of people, because I don't think this is something unique to me. I think this happens to other women as well, and you don't have to be located in Italy. You can be located in in other countries like Australia, UK, Canada, and still encounter the same thing, that you're a brown girl, but then you are so restricted and limited with how many things you can do. And so that's how I was like, I'm gonna write about this, and I felt like I had a lot to say. And for me, it was very therapeutic in a way too, because I felt like I was able to get a lot of my thoughts out there. And so far I got good positive feedback, the book that I have written, because I could see that people can relate to it.
Yeah, I gotta say that I really enjoyed the book myself. I think I lived a very, let's say, polar opposite lifestyle than you did. I grew up in the States, obviously a white male. So just understanding that different point of view really meant a lot to me. And it seemed as if growing up, there was so much that you had to keep inside. Your thoughts and feelings about the world, your even your liking for boys in class, or who you can be friends with. So much of your own thoughts and personality you had to keep bundled up, just because the culture norms of what you were surrounded by. It seemed as if this book really served as a catalyst for your life to just kind of let it all out there. And even by chapter, it was very much like how I dressed, what we ate, blah, blah, blah. And you just kind of went over every core aspect of living and how it was in the past to how you can now live on your own terms. And I really, really enjoyed that. Now, my question for you, Urmi, it's come to my knowledge, or just objectively, you've turned into a very successful young woman, and you grew up with very strict parents, mostly because of the Bengali culture that you had behind that dictated a lot of your parents' sorts of parenting. But when you were going into detail in the book of how strict they were, in some other cultures, that would definitely not be the case. When it comes to judging whether a parent was a good parent or not, we look at the outcome, or how the kid is currently doing as they are now in adulthood. And you've done very well for yourself. So do you think having very strict rules actually can benefit the child long term when it comes to their success and happiness? Or do you think it just kind of letting them free reign their childhood, they can still be successful and happy? What would you recommend? And if you were to have kids one day, would you raise your kid with the same strict rules that you had?
I think it's not good to have too much of an extreme. Like, you don't want to give them too much freedom, but at the same time, I don't think you want to be too much strict either. I think you need something in between. You need like a balance. I do think that the fact that my parents were very strict gave me a lot of discipline. I think I learned that because they were very strict, but I also feel like I grew up with a limiting belief that I couldn't do a lot of the things. So that was something that I feel like I was never able to evolve or experience things that I wish I was able to experience as a normal teenager. So I think, like, when someone is too much strict, I think it's still not good for the kid, because they will do things behind their parents' back, and they could get in trouble. They could do things that they regret. And at the same time, I feel like when you give too much freedom is also not good either, because they might just go and try everything, and sometimes it might have consequences. I think as a parent, you need to have a balance, and I think you also want to have an open communication and just also understand their point of view, because especially for immigrant parents who move from a country like Bangladesh and go to a Western society, I think they have to have that mindset or that expectation that they cannot grow up just fully Bengali. They will have a mix of another culture, and this is where the whole third culture kid comes in. So I do think you need something in between, honestly. Too much of each is on, like, of what we have on the extreme parts is not good for any culture, I would say. So
Yeah, definitely. No, I agree. I think the hardest part is really finding that balance. The more I mature, I'm currently 23, as I reflect on how my parents parented me, I think we all go through a time where we're like, well, why did they do that? Why did they do this? Why were they so strict here? Why were they so lenient here? But once you mature, you just kind of relate to your parents more and have a little more empathy. Be like, oh, they're just trying to do the best they could. And some parents, that means be extremely strict and try to raise them this exact perfect way. And for some parents, that's the complete opposite. But both have the exact same end goal of just making the best human possible. So I think when you look at it at that perspective, it's hard to ever have judgment towards parents or cultures and their styles. So I like that a lot. You talked often in the book about how important it was, maybe not necessarily in your immediate family, but as your community as a whole, on the reputation among the other community members. How do you think caring so much about your reputation as a family affected the way you were raised?
So I think it was always part of my life how, like, I always had this fear, concern about how people would have thought of me, perceived of me, what people would have thought of me. especially because we have like this like famous sentence that we say, what would people say, which is very common to say in the whole like South Asian community. And this is something that I grew up listening to. So every time I would ask simple things like, oh, I want to go out, there's always this sentence that my parents would say, like, what would people say? Or, you know, like, I want to dress this way, what would people say? So because of that, I never really tried anything. And I was like, you know what? I feel like reputation is so important. So I would just refrain myself from doing things. But then as I was growing up, I felt like if I keep caring about what people will say, I will never do anything in my life. And this is where I was thinking, you know, people will always have something to say no matter what you do, whether you do good or you do bad, they will always have an opinion about it. And so the key is you just, you know, when it like the opinion enters from one ear, it goes out from another ear, and you just move on and do your thing. And maybe you give them something to talk about. But I think that what people say really do not define you as a person or do not define your actions. I think that if whatever you do, you're just being honest to yourself and it's really aligned with what you want to do in life, then you should not really care about what people say. And so now I feel like I care a little bit less about what people say. I care a little bit less about the repetition. But when I was much younger, I think that like played a big part in my life to the point that I would like not do anything, like literally. And so now I became a little bit of like rebel, quote unquote, a little bit of rebel where I actually like still go ahead and do my things because I feel like they bring me so much fulfillment.
I love that. Yeah, I think no one is perfect and we all still care about what people think. So I'm glad that for you it's definitely lessened over time, to say the least. You know, I grew up a pretty different background where I was the only child, and both my parents were pretty well-established, well-respected doctors in the community. And they were looked up upon by a lot of community members. I remember always getting comments from neighbors, how much they look up to our family. And other families in the community that kind of had, I guess, what you call the same status. I realized that their household was much different from ours because their household's parents, and I guess the family as a whole, cared so much about their reputation and respect. And that's what pretty much the entire family was being held upon. So if any kid were to be 16 and started drinking alcohol, go to a party, or acted up in school, got in a fight, it would be a huge catastrophe because not only did it affect that kid, it affected the entire family's image. I was very fortunate that I think my parents realized that although they have a reputation and they have their profession, they have their businesses, that's also separate from me. So they never pushed that on me like I saw many of my friends' parents did for them. And I really feel to have a happy, successful family, caring so much about their reputation is only going to lead to disaster because, like you said, like someone's always going to be talking about you. Someone's always going to be disappointed in what you're doing. So you can't please everyone. So I liked it a lot. I think it was John Wooden, a famous basketball player, said, like, I don't care about any of my players' reputations. I care about their character and how they treat themselves, how they treat the close group of people who they talk to and are involved with on a daily basis. That's the true test of a man. So I love that. Yeah, I'm really, really glad you touched on that in the book. It really meant a lot. Urmi, so in your book, you discussed quite a bit about the social norms that your family and your culture practices. One thing I've noticed about learning more about religions and society as a whole is that the religion itself, whether yours being Muslim, the Nation of Islam, or if you're Jewish or a Christian, there's a big difference between what the actual book, whether it's the Testament, the Quran, whatever it may be, says, and what the culture that those people identify as religion base their life around. So it seemed as if we oftentimes group what Muslims do on a daily basis, whether it's wear the hijab or whatever it may be, as if they are doing that because they're Muslim. But it seems as if a lot of it is cultural norms around the religion itself. Do you believe that many of these practices stem from the religion, or do you think it's what we make of the book in the religion?
I would say it's how we interpret things from the book, and then we always use the religion as an excuse for all these cultural practices. Because I also discuss a little bit about this in the book, and I remember as well that every time there was something that I wanted to do, it was always about religion. They were like, oh, it's because of religion that you cannot do this, because of religion you cannot do this. And I remember they would tell me this, and then when my friends would ask me, okay, why can you not do things, I would actually tell them it's because of religion. So they would also think that I couldn't do things because of religion. So because it was religion, it was like, oh, it's like, no, okay, we cannot like make her commit a sin because of all this. So I actually thought that it was always religion for the longest time. But then when I started to talk about this with one of my friends, she was like, no, it cannot be religion. They always mix religion and culture together, and they always blame religion. Because I think like religion on its like pure sense, it's not supposed to be something bad, you know. Even like when I spoke about this with one of my cousins who's very religious, and I was like, I want to get his opinion about that. He was like, no, they always mix religion and cultures together, and they always say that it's some of the things that we cannot do, it's because of religion. But in reality, it's not that. All these practices that we have, it's because of the cultures, and so we take what's religion and then we interpret it, and then we make our own way, and we make our own rules, and then we blame it to it. But it's really like, I would say it's really cultural norms and cultural practices, and this I've seen it also in other cultures as well. And I don't think religion in its pure sense is supposed to create conflicts or, you know, fights and arguments between families and stuff like that.
Yeah, I completely agree. You know, for the brief study I've done when it came to a handful of religions, I've noticed that the book itself is very easy to understand and easy to follow, I believe. Of course, sometimes it's translated, maybe a little hard to read, but overall, the main lessons amongst the far majority of religions are very similar, of treating people with respect, treating people nicely, helping thy neighbor, and, you know, a handful of other of the 10 Commandments, whatever it may be. The difference really comes into how people interpret it, like you said, in the culture. The use of the cultural norms as the number one thing stopping that religion from getting more members and engaging with more people. There are so many religions to me that seem so enticing, but because of the cultural norms and practices, I'm just like, oh, I don't know how I feel about that. That's a little odd. I'm not sure why that's the case. And it totally debunks what the book says itself. So that's always fascinated me, so I really wanted to bring that up to you. Another thing that has been a topic of conversation amongst my friends and I, and something that you discuss in the book that I really want to go over, is arranged marriages. So I would love to know, if you're open to answering, how do you feel about arranged marriages? And do you think they'll become more or less popular over time?
You know what? I always had a very negative opinion about it, meaning that because arranged marriages, how it works, at least things will change a little bit, evolved a little bit, meaning that when my parents got married was like they also had an arranged marriage, and it works. And a lot of my family relatives also got arranged marriages, and they have successful marriages. But the thing that really bothered me a little bit was that with arranged marriages, back in the days, you would just meet the person, I would say, like probably on your wedding or a couple of days before, and you wouldn't interact with them. You wouldn't get to know them prior to getting married. So this was something I was like, it doesn't work like that. You want to spend time with this person. You want to get to know the person. And then through time, things change a little bit. Now we have biodatas. I don't know if you're familiar with this concept where basically you have an actual resume. Like each candidate has a resume. Literally, it's like when you're applying for a job, it exists. There was also a documentary about it on Netflix. So you have this biodata. It's a resume. Like a resume, you have your picture, then you have like, you write down all your, like the name of your family members, where they lived, if they're married, if they have kids and stuff like that. And then you have to write down like your studies and what are your hobbies. And then you send this out to each family. So these actually work. And then if they choose you as a candidate, potential candidate, then the families meet. And then you also have a chance to actually meet the person. And if you want, you can also like get to know them. You can get to know them. You can, build a relationship up there. But usually, so for instance, this is something that actually is happening nowadays. And this is how arranged marriages are being set up. So people can actually get to know the person. And so now my opinion about arranged marriages changed a little bit, meaning that because I've seen two sides, because I've seen that they work, but at the same time I've also seen that they do not work. I think it really depends, meaning that you don't want to go extreme with it to the point that, okay, let's just get them off married after they meet one time, but you want to give them the chance of like getting them to know each other, and also to see if they can build up a relationship, to see if there is chemistry. And so I would say that in 2023 things change a little bit to the point that there is a little bit of flexibility in that sense, that you can actually meet and talk to the person, whereas back in the days it was a little bit more, I want to say it was strict. I want to say it was a bit stricter. But I'm also open also to having love marriages, because I would say even love marriages, some work, some do not work. So it goes both ways. It's just being able to click with someone and finding the right person. I do like to create a fusion of the two, where yes, it's an arranged marriage, but these are people that actually fell in love. So that's how I see it. I'm not really against arranged marriages. I think if someone is open to it, why not? Why not? So they work, actually.
It's always been fascinating to me, because the more I research about it, the more I realize that they have some of the best success rates when it comes to long-term marriage is the arranged marriages themselves, which you wouldn't think so. But my question to that is, do you think that's the case because the parents often know best and they're not necessarily looking for that love? It's more of, do they fit each other's lives well? Or is it because of the same places where they practice arranged marriages, there's so much societal pressure that if you were to leave the marriage itself, that would be so frowned upon, therefore they kind of stay out of that what would people think mentality? What do you think is causing that to be so successful when it comes to arranged marriages?
It's a good question. I think so. I do think what you just said about the second point is totally right, meaning that sometimes because of this fear of what people might say, people just stick to it and they just tend to till the end, and there are consequences, mental health consequences with that. That is one of the reasons, and I've seen it. I actually have seen people that because they didn't want to go through all the mess and how it would have created so much backlash, that they just stayed in the marriage and they never said one word. And I do think that for other cases, sometimes I feel like parents do make good choices, but I also think that sometimes the choice comes more about the reputation, more about the wealth of the person, the family background. So that's also very important. So I think sometimes that when parents are choosing a potential partner for their kids, it's really not about someone's personality. It's more about the outside factors, like money, work, family. Do they have a well-established company? Things like that, Those play a very big part whenever they're choosing someone, and looks as well. Looks is also very important, actually, unfortunately. And then it works out. I would say probably because they clicked, probably because there was chemistry. But I would say it really depends on, it's a case by case thing. I do think that whatever we just talked about, that sometimes people just stick to it because they have no other choice. Although things are changing, I want to say things are changing. When someone is unhappy, they actually decide to go forward with a separation. I'm seeing this more and more often, which was something that I wouldn't see when I was a kid, but now I see it a lot, that people are actually, when they're unhappy, they just take their stuff and they decided that it's better to part away.
I'm glad that seems to be more of an option for people. I really can't imagine spending a lifetime, laying next to someone who probably at that point was once a stranger to you and now is someone who you may not even like or hate, to say the least. So that's incredible. I think that is just a microcosm of divorces as a whole currently, where, in America, where I'm from, I think the divorce rate is closer to 53, maybe about 57%. So that means if you were to get married, there's a better chance of you being divorced than you staying married forever. So in my mind, I'm thinking, my first thought is, well, it's terrible. We really got to get better at choosing better partners. But I'm also thinking that we've come pretty much almost the entire history of civilization that we know of where women didn't have the choice to leave. And now they're just given the choice, and the statistics are changing because of the choice. So it must be more freedom that is causing this. So I don't know if it's necessarily we're all just terrible at picking our partners and we're all just falling blindly in love and then falling out of it just as fast, or if it's just the freedom and autonomy individuals, in particular women, are having nowadays and never had before.
Yeah, I do think it's the fact that women have the freedom and they can choose for themselves, and they want to be independent and be responsible for their decision, which is why I think a lot of them they're stepping up and being I'm gonna live on my own terms, and I'm gonna decide for my own. And I'm seeing this more and more often. I see it a lot among Bengali girls as well, who do not want to get married within their own culture. They don't want to get married to Bengali people, and they actually get married to someone who's not Bengali, even though this creates issues. But eventually I would say that things turn out to be good, where your parents maybe start accepting you for the decision that you have made. So I also think that it's very hard to be a parent, but I think that the way they think is not always right. And given that we live in a world that is so open-minded, there is so much diversity, there are so many things that we can do, you have to be open enough to know that, your daughter might fall in love with someone who's outside of the culture, who's not Bengali or not Indian. It could be someone that is from another culture. And I'm seeing this a lot more. So it's nice to see mixed marriages, honestly. So yeah.
Yeah, I completely agree. I think the more the internet has evolved, the more people have been exposed to different cultures and different societies, and we're all a lot more connected than ever before. And so a lot more ideas come into play that never existed in the past. I think my generation has definitely noticed that there's a big change in comparison to what my generation believes in comparison to our grandparents. And I see so often that we are so fixated on trying to change our thought, or the thoughts our grandparents are having, or even our parents, to say the least. But I've come to the conclusion that good luck with that. People, everyone wants change, but no one wants to change, right? So expecting people who have thought the same thing for 40, 50, 60, 70 years, and then just through one conversation, you're completely open their mind, I think is so unlikely. But But I'm glad to see that there's been kind of like an incremental shift around the world on many of these things. So I think it's a point in the column for freedom. So it's amazing. It's very, very good. Now, Urmi, you wrote this book, and I believe this book has the potential to have a massive effect on any person who is part of a minority, wherever they're from, or feels like they don't fit in, especially women that can ascribe to the situation you were in when you were young. So I'm very, very glad you wrote this book, not only for yourself and your own self-expression, but for them. And I think that's truly amazing. One thing I want to ask you, I know in the book you referred to your 14-year-old self a lot, or your 12-year-old self a lot. What advice would you give to your 14-year-old self?
That's such a difficult question, because I always tell myself what I would think to my younger self. Like, if I had my younger self in front of me today, what would I tell her? Honestly, I would probably tell her to, and this is something that I have learned like literally a few years ago, I would probably tell her to embrace the fear and to use the fear as a guide towards the things that she wants to do. And probably because when I was a kid, I wouldn't do a lot of the things because of many fears, fear of being judged, fear that people will like find out. And because of that, I think that I was always inside my bubble. I never like explored the world the way I wanted to do it. And then in the recent years, I actually have read a book about fear, which is called My Friend Fear. And in this book, there was a quotation that I related to, which was called, the quotation said, fear is the light that it's meant to guide us. And so when I read that, I just felt like it just changed my whole view about fears. And I've never seen fear as the light. And so if I had my younger self in front of me today, I would probably read out that quote and tell her just embrace it and go forward with the things that you want to do, no matter what people will say. Because I think that will like really lead you to success and to shape you as a person that you're meant to be. So I would really tell her that. I
really love that. I think it's amazing. I think looking at fear as the light to guide you through life, I think is a very good observation. And I think a lesson that we all need to constantly remember, because so many parts of our life where fear is just inevitable. Fear is always coming up, and knowing that's probably the direction we should head is refreshing to hear. So I like it a lot. And now, the last question I want to ask you, Urmi, is the same question I ask everyone when I wrap up these episodes, and that is, what is the most important message you feel the world needs to hear right now?
The most important one, I would probably say that when you do not fit the box, you create the box. And this is something that I feel like I struggle a lot, because I always wanted to fit something, but I don't need to fit anywhere. I just have to fit in my own box. I just have to create that box that I am comfortable with, and I just have to make sure that it fits me. And I would probably say this is what people need to hear. It's that when you cannot fit a box, when you cannot tick that box in a questionnaire or something like that, you create that box.
That is a Hall of Fame level quote right there. And I'll go down and question everything podcast history right there. I love that. If you're not fit in the box, you can create your own box. That's just amazing, Urmi. And your story and your book really gave me a different perspective on life and how I view others. And I know the more people read it, the more people are going to enjoy it, and the more people are going to live a more positive life. So I really appreciate you coming on the podcast today, Urmi. It's been a great pleasure, and hope to have you on again soon.